Hey, I'm Nick from Kinetic, and thanks for checking out our series from the floor. As usual, we're talking with brokers about advice and best practices. Today, I've got Ben from Cowan Logistics. Ben, thanks for being on, man. You want to do a quick intro?
Absolutely. Yep. I am the VP of Sales at Cowan Logistics. Cowan was my first job out of college in 2013. I went to college for film. I think, like a lot of people, I just kind of went into trucking knowing absolutely nothing about trucking, but it's been quite the ride. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like once you get in, you don't ever want to leave. I'm sure like this, I like trucking. This is for me, right? So that's kind of how my career has been.
Yeah, man, I feel you on that. And I apologize if I sound like a monster today. I still have a bit of a cold, but we're talking about creating a sales program that scales today. Now, sales are super important for any company. So I guess, what do you mean by creating a sales program that scales?
Yeah. So, I've kind of had, I mentioned, I started out at Cowan not really knowing a lot. When I started, I was an inside sales rep, and we probably did things like how a lot of companies do them on the customer sales side. We hired large class sizes of sales reps, and then it was like, here's your phone, here's Google, like go find some shippers and hit the phones and like crush out some cold calls and go get it.
Yeah.
And so then, like doing that, I just always saw like, and we, as I moved up and, I was a manager at our Atlanta branch and did some different things, we kind of always saw like, we had the same problem where we'd get some momentum, get some traction, and then you always had this constant turnover because one, it's just a super tough grind of a job to just come in and crank out cold calls every day. So you lose people. But also you have that turnover because you need those hungry new reps to come in, and then you have this constant like recycling of people, and it's just so hard to scale. You have to hire so many people, constantly recruiting, because it's just a never ending struggle to keep up. So it was one of those things where as I started to then move up and get the opportunity to manage and like be that boss person, I was realizing like I'm doing a terrible job at my job. Like I'm losing people. We're not able to really consistently grow. We're not able to hit our budgets and our forecasts because we're just kind of like, and we're just kind of like doing the same thing and smashing our head against the wall, like doing the same thing over and over. And so from that is where I kind of realized like, okay, there's got to be a better way. Like, how do we actually create something that's going to be a scalable system that's not just going to be, something that we're constantly having to shoot ourselves in the foot every couple of months, hiring and then letting people go.
Yeah, man. I think you described a problem that a lot of brokers run into. Like everything you just described is stuff that I've heard from brokers across the country at every stage of development. So instead of doing things that way, like what are some things that you've learned or like best practices that companies should keep in mind? Like what should people do?
I think the main thing is like, I think a lot of people that get into transportation, right? Like this was true for me. This was my experience, was like, I got into it. I didn't know anything about transportation, but also sales. Like I was learning sales, and then I was learning how to be a manager. I was a terrible manager. And you're just kind of put in that position because you were a successful rep. And so like, I had to like hit the pause button and just be like, okay, what's out there? Like what technology is out there? What resources are out there? So like the thing for me, and I think the thing for a lot of people would just be like actually go out there, admit that you don't really have all the answers, and then see what's out there, see what automations are out there, see what technology is out there, see what different platforms are out there, different things that are out there that you can actually then start to regroup and build a system. For us, what that looked like was basically having our reps doing cold outreach at all. We found that if we could take that part away and take the cold outreach away, then all a rep would have to do would just be service the customer, serve their customer. And be a problem solver, do all the fun things about the job, about being a freight broker, and not the bad things. So one, we could like actually keep people at Cowan. We could actually keep people in the job and them not leave and be like frustrated. And then also we'd set them up for success because we were funneling them these warm leads. So that's what we found success in, is just basically taking that whole cold outreach out of the hands of our team and just feeding our team actually active prospects that are interested in working with us.
Dude, that's really interesting when you start talking about the warm leads rather than all the cold outreach, because you hear that all the time. It's just like a class of early 20 somethings hammering the phones trying to get these cold leads on the phone. So what have you guys found useful for generating warm leads? Is it existing shippers and consignees? Do you have other like more marketing centered ways of generating warm leads? What strategies do you guys use?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different things. The main one I would say that seems like the obvious one that I feel like everybody always talks about, but like referrals are always the best leads. So like I feel like that's a big underutilized thing. It was for us for many years and has been the main thing. I mean, when you actually do a really good job for your customer, it's amazing how many people they'll be like, oh yeah, and here's my other vendors, here's other people that I want you to work with. Like that's a huge one right there, and has been a main source of leads for us. And the other side of that too is like a lot of reps. What we found is a lot of reps that are actually really good at being like a freight broker are actually good at, you know, those customer relationships, providing updates, are good at pricing. They're not necessarily good cold callers or good at that cold outreach part. So if you take that away, then you can actually evaluate a rep based on like, okay, how good are they actually, how good are they at their job? How good are they at serving their customers and moving freight, which is like, at the end of the day, what you want. You don't really want a bunch of people who are just so good at just repetitively calling shippers and hounding shippers all day. So referrals have been the main one. And then beyond that, yeah, I mean, there's there's just so much out there, and it changes. I mean, it changes every week. It changes every month, like different automations, lead gen, and marketing things out there that you can do.
Yeah, you've mentioned technology and automation a lot. Where are there any specific tools that you guys have used, or any ways that you kind of incorporated automation into your process that you want to share with folks?
Yeah, sure. So like
you don't need to name drop specific people if you don't want to, but
so the main one, right, is like warm leads. So like for us, what that's defined as is somebody who's actively looking for pricing and actively looking for some work. So there's like sort of two parts to it. There's one is like the actual cold outreach and seeing if there's interest there and seeing if there's a warm lead. So there's technology out there for that part, and there's lots of different services that are you probably Google like 10 or 20 that can get you contact information and like that, because a lot of times what people are doing is they're just going and they're calling somebody, and then that person's like, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. And like that whole like 2-minute exchange could have just been replaced by an automation to find, okay, who actually is the point of contact at ABC shipping company. And then there's like the CRM. Another big problem for us, at least, and probably for other people, is you get reps in that a lot of times they're like taking notes on their like notebooks or like post-it notes, or like they've got these spreadsheets that they've saved to some like hidden folder that you can't find after they're gone.
Yeah.
So like, how do you actually store that? How do you actually force people to use a CRM? It's like, it was always a struggle for me to get people to actually use their CRM. So we're like, okay, why are we trying to force people to do it? Let's just do it for them. Same thing with cold outreach. So our reps don't do any data entry into CRM. The only time they use their CRM is to update, knowing, hey, this is when I'm following up. This is when I'm reaching back out. So that's been a big automation, big time saver for us. And there's things like Zapier that does really good email parsing, that can scrape things like that. But but beyond that, once you actually have that information, then you can actually you actually have that stored in a place where you're, as a company, you have access to that information, right? And it's not just on somebody's notebook that they threw away 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking about those different information silos where it's just like all the carrier data is housed within one individual's head and all the customer information within one individual's head, it's a huge problem for brokers. I guess let me ask you this.
It's probably on the carrier sales side too, right? I mean, like people have their carriers or their MCs, like they're written down somewhere, or spreadsheets, their different carriers that they're using, or that are their go-to carriers, and what their phone numbers are, what their emails are, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I more often hear about that on the carrier side, just because there's so much tribal knowledge involved in terms of like, oh, carrier rep A knows someone to call. There can be ABC carrier. They run Chicago to Dallas all the time, and they leave, and then like, nobody else knows about this mystery carrier. So it's interesting to hear about it on the customer side too. I guess let me ask you this: like, at what stage of growth do brokers need to really start thinking about this kind of thing? Is it when they're really small, just kind of like really small mom and pop shops slinging freight, or is kind of more once you've grown to a like more established 25, $50 million company?
I would say whatever you're doing, like stop, hit the pause button and figure this out first. Because even if let's say you're just in your basement, in sweatpants, just moving freight, like at some point you're going to hit that wall where like you can't cold call anymore. Whatever you're doing, you run out of time because you're servicing your customers, and also you're not servicing your customers. We're just focused on that. So from the beginning, you've got to have this process in place, because otherwise you can't grow, and you're going to hit that wall, whether it's 1 million, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, 200 million, doesn't matter. You're going to hit that wall at some point, unless you just have unlimited cash to burn and you can just hire 1 million people and have crazy recruiting classes and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, like everything you've talked about hits on a common theme that I preach a lot, which is just like driving efficiencies within your organization. I mean, it's super important no matter what stage of growth you are, and the importance just compounds as you get bigger. I mean, like a small problem when you're a $5 million broker, if you don't fix it, becomes a huge problem once you're a $100 million broker.
And two, like also is like going back to what you said, like what technologies do we use and things like that. Like I think because things change so quickly and everything's constantly changing, I think you have to set aside time in your day, week, like to constantly be demoing what's out there. You just stay in tune with what's out there, because it constantly is changing. And then you just have to know, like, okay, how does this fit into our system? How does this fit into our process? And what are you looking for? And know, like every day, like what am I looking for? Like in an ideal world, what kinds of things would be out there that I'm looking for? Because it's just constantly changing. You have to make sure that you're constantly plugging those into your sales system.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, a lot of brokers I've talked to struggle to get out of the daily grind and make that time for themselves to have those more strategic like conversations with their team, or just time to think themselves strategically about what they want to do with their organization. Yeah. So like as we wind down here, there's one question I always ask folks towards the end of these, and that's, what's something that you've learned recently?
I would say, okay, so something I've learned recently is like the power, it seems really obvious, but like the power of social media, of LinkedIn. Like I always just totally ignored LinkedIn, I was just like, this platform's terrible. I mean, there's all the content on is terrible, and it's just like,
until you saw my content, and then you were like,
oh, shit. I saw your content, I was like, okay, I gotta get on LinkedIn. Yeah, no, I actually, I was kind of like, I've always just been super like, I'll scroll on stuff. I think 99% of the people on LinkedIn are like that. It's like, I'll scroll, I'll look at stuff, but I'm not going to like comment or let people know that I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But yeah, like getting on there, like it's crazy just how many connections you make, and like, and whether it's for recruiting or for whatever, or for leads, like that's another great lead source, connecting with people there. As long as you do it in a genuine way where you're looking to build relationships, not just like, what's my short-term value going to be here, and trying to make some sort of quick sale, like right off the bat. But yeah, it's so powerful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm a big fan of the power of LinkedIn. I'm glad you brought that up. That was all great advice. I appreciate taking the time to chat today. We're intentionally keeping these short so people can actually watch them, but like these are complicated subjects. There's always more to learn. Ben, if someone wants to reach out to you, how do they do it?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the best way. Just look me up, connect. I always accept a connection. So
Perfect.
happy to connect there.
All right, Ben. Thanks for being on, and looking forward to seeing more from you and the group at Cowen.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.